Good morning, Ms. Shapiro here. We are going to do video 2 of 2 on urbanization, and this is more the problems related to urbanization and sustainability. So remember that if you need some general definitions of urbanization, you want to watch my first video. So we already talked a little bit about cities and how cities develop and why cities develop and some of the problems with cities developing. Just remember that cities are mini ecosystems. We put in things, we have inputs, things like energy and water and air, food, people, products, and we get out some outputs. We get out air pollution and waste, but we also get out goods and services like the production of goods. They also generate a lot of greenhouse gases. So that's a little bit about what we're talking today. So one of the first things that we need to talk about are the depletion of resources. So typically in cities, we use more resources than in urban areas, or they just compound our use of resources. The first one is excessive use of water. Although agriculture is the #1 use for water, we also see that cities draw a lot of water. The development of cities draws a lot of water. Sometimes additional problems that we have when we use too much water is what we call saltwater intrusion. This doesn't happen in places like here in southeastern Colorado where we are, but it does happen on the coast, say for example in South Carolina or in parts of New England, in Florida, Houston of Texas, in the southeast portion of Texas, because they're along a coast. So again, not a problem here in Colorado, but a problem along the coast. And we call that saltwater intrusion. So normally, remember, you draw out of an aquifer, and that aquifer has fresh water. Along the coastline, if you begin to draw too much water out of an aquifer, then it gets this kind of cone of depression here, and therefore water from the ocean then begins to move in along the side and begins to infiltrate here into the aquifer. And so instead of drawing out fresh water, so here we have a pumped well, there's still plenty of fresh water. As the fresh water begins to be depleted, we have this cone of depression that results when we deplete too much water. Now, in order to kind of fill up the aquifer, water from the ocean comes in and begins to fill up this aquifer. And so when we pump it, we get salt water instead of fresh water. Obviously, we can't use that for drinking, and we can't use it for agriculture. So that's a big problem. So saltwater intrusion into your aquifers is a big problem of urbanization because we're drawing on so much water. Additional problem is noise pollution. So think about all the cars. Maybe you've heard a siren. If you've lived in a big city, you hear sirens in the morning, or you hear garbage trucks, you hear people out. This could also be airplanes, etc. Noise pollution just refers to any type of pollution involved with hearing things. What we really want to talk about is that this disrupts organisms. It can disrupt humans. It can cause them not to sleep well, to have anxiety. That can lead to mental health impacts, but it also impacts organisms. Maybe they have a hard time mating because they can't hear the mating calls. This is the big problem with ships that are using sonar, because it disrupts the echolocation of whales. And so it's hard for them to find prey. It's hard for them to hunt. It's also hard for them to mate. So noise pollution is anytime humans are putting out excess noise. This is really impactful in big cities, in airports, and then like we were talking about in the ocean. You guys are maybe familiar with light pollution. Light pollution is just having too much light. So we see that again in the cities. So if you've ever gone to look at the stars, you maybe go outwards towards more rural areas where there's less light. In fact, here in southeastern Colorado, we have, I'm trying to think, in the Sangre de Cristos, we have, what's that city called? And it's a certified dark city, meaning that people have installed lights specifically that point downward to kind of limit the amount of light pollution. So people all over the world travel to this city in order to see the stars, because the city is a certified dark city. And I want to say maybe it's Westcliff, that's what I'm looking for. And so it's a certified dark city because we have tried to limit that light pollution. Other types of light pollution are specifically harmful along the coast. Maybe you've heard that turtles use the moonlight in order to, like their nests hatch on the beach, and then the turtles use the moonlight in order to find the ocean. And so if there's big lights, say from hotels or other developments, the turtles get confused and they actually walk towards those lights and away from from the beach, away from the ocean, and then they end up dying, and it's really sad. So that's light pollution. We've seen that it impacts coral and it impacts all sorts of organisms. It also is disruptive to humans. It's hard to sleep, and so many people have blackout curtains and things like that to block out the light, because if you're not sleeping, that can lead to depression and anxiety and mental health impacts. Other impacts of urbanization includes the impact on cycles. Impervious circles disrupt the water cycle. Look for another video, or actually we're going to cover that in class. So that just means that that water is falling onto the roads and it doesn't sink in because it's concrete, and so it runs off, and that leads to lots of problems and disruption of the water cycle. We also have that carbon dioxide from the fossil fuels alters the carbon cycle. That leads to climate change. We're going to talk more about that later on in this semester. We see air pollution, the releases of NO2 or nitrous oxide from traffic and cars. And it's just more people. So we see the spread of disease. COVID-19 or Corona was a great example of this. We saw that it really hit the cities, specifically New York first, and then it then eventually moved into the rural areas. So for example, it is January of 2021, and it's not really been until November and December that we've seen really big cases in rural areas. And that just has to do with the fact that there's not as many people here, so it's harder for the disease to spread. In cities, we see the buildup of waste, right? More people, more trash, so we have to deal with landfills, and that's a problem. We see water pollution, going back to that impervious surfaces leads to water pollution, as well as, just dumping things. This is not necessarily, the impacts of urbanization are not necessarily worse in developing countries. They're probably just more evident. So maybe they don't have as many landfills, so you see the trash more, because the factories don't necessarily have things that are preventing the air pollution from being released. You see that more. You see more cars, and so it's more evident in developing countries. That doesn't make it necessarily worse than in developed countries. So one of the solutions to some urbanization includes smart growth. This means making efficient and effective choices in developing our land. So maybe you've been to parts of Denver, and what we really want to talk about is working where you're living, where you're playing, where you like to hang out. And so this helps minimize wasted space, make effective use of money, and has land planning decisions. When it says makes land planning democratic, that means that voters vote on what they want. Do you want to allow commercial businesses here? Do you want to keep this as only residential? And so they have a say in that. And oftentimes what we use is mixed land. So if you've ever been to Sixth Street Mall is a great example. We see businesses in the first, in the bottom portions, and then people live in apartments at the top. There's lots of mass transit, so maybe they don't necessarily need a car. And then there's a park or a green space nearby, and that's a great example of smart growth. So people don't really need to leave their neighborhood. They have places to go to enjoy the outside. They have restaurants, they have businesses, and their homes are all nearby. That's called smart growth. And typically we see that it has vertical growth. So people move upwards. They have apartments on top of things as compared to houses on the outside where they move in. And so we're developing vertically as compared to horizontally, and that's really, really important. So sustainability also means building buildings that have features that are beneficial. So for example, they may have rooftop gardens that are going to use to capture this water that rains down as compared to it going onto an impervious surface and running off. They have solar panels. They're LEED certified. If you've ever heard that, a LEED certified building, that means that it has features that make it more sustainable. This could be low flush toilets. It could be lights that are on automatic. This could be LED lights. All of those are examples of more sustainable buildings. Maybe they have areas for cars to plug in. Maybe they have food that are grown in these rooftop gardens, and so we're maximizing the space. Rainwater is collected and filtered and used. It's easy for people to get to because it's near mass transportation. And oftentimes their windows and their surfaces are made from recycled metal or recycled glass. And so that's a great way to improve sustainability. Maybe they use sustainable things that were grown like bamboo, or they have cogeneration where they're heating the building while generating electricity at the same time. They probably have intensive recycling programs. Maybe they make use of the space so that it's effective so you can do more stuff in a smaller amount of space. So mass transit is kind of the last way that cities can improve sustainability. If you look at this, right, if everybody took buses or the subway, look at how many people you can fit on one vehicle as compared to if everybody took their own car. And so oftentimes what cities or companies will do is they will provide you with mass transit tickets. So they'll say, we'll give you a $200 worth towards using the subway if you don't drive your car. And the city, the company that gives you that gets a tax write-off, and it saves them from having to provide parking and charging their people. So maybe they'll charge you $300 a month to park your car, or they'll give you $300 in mass transit, and therefore it's easier for you, and so you'll choose mass transit. And so that's a really great example of making things more sustainable. You see, we don't need to build as many roads because more people are riding the buses, so the highways tend to experience less traffic and less congestion, and that's an overall beneficial thing. So I think that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, please contact me or your teacher.